This is Supply Chain Breakdown, and today we will be breaking down the hidden cost of forecast accuracy. You know who I am. I'm Conor, Marketing Director here at Lokad, and to my left, the indefatigable Joannes, Vermorel, Lokad founder and CEO. Now today, before we get started, comment down below. Do you think that increased forecast accuracy is a KPI worth pursuing? If so, why? Comment down below. You're talking directly to me today. Anything you ask, any comments, any questions, I will post directly to Joannes in about 20 minutes. And with that, Joannes, let's get started. First question. What are we angry about today? What is our problem with forecast accuracy, the bedrock of business?
I would not go as far as being the bedrock of business, maybe of bedrock of theoretical supply chain management. Now, the real problem is that for the quasi-totality of businesses, considering what they are doing right now, it's a complete distraction. It's a massive distraction that has been ongoing for decades. And so when we are talking about the hidden cost, I would say the problem the beef that I have with forecasting accuracy is that, again, for the quasi-totality of the companies who operate the supply chain, this artifact is consuming more than half of the management bandwidth and for very, very little upside. And so my point is that it is I would say an enormous distraction, which can be made worse when people start to instrument that in ways that just complicates the process around forecasting accuracy for, again, very, very little upsides.
Again, if you're saying that the concept of forecast accuracy monopolizes bandwidth, are you limiting the criticism or like the cost to just sort of like abstract, like, well, time, focus, attention? Because many would argue, I'm sure, that there is also a concrete financial dimension to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, first, when you start looking at the future, when I say, again, the quasi-totality of companies, when you start looking at the futures, there are so many elephants that are completely ignored. Do you adopt the client perspective so that you can even see cannibalization and substitution? If you do not, I'm not too sure exactly what you're doing with your forecast. Then, do you take into account the pricing? Because again, whenever you want to project yourself into the future, you have to take into account of your own prices, the prices of your competitors. Again, you see, the peculiar problem that I have with forecasting accuracy is that the traditional mindset, supply chain mindsets, look at the future exactly like an astronomer look at the future of the position of planets. You know, you have a complete symmetry between the past and the future, and I would say a time reversal symmetry, and you assume that the future is just the extension of the past. And to some extent, what is extremely strange is that in the classical way to look at the future, hence forecasting accuracy, it's as if the company had no agency whatsoever concerning the future. You know, it's just the time series perspective. So again, we have seen that cannibalization substitution are problems. You have the pricing effect. You have also the fact that companies are going to spend, I would say, the quasi-totality of their efforts on forecasting demand. But what about the other sources of uncertainty, lead times, returns, etc., etc., etc.? And then we can go further asking, what about the granularity at which you are forecasting? Even if we accept the premise that we are going to do those forecasts, which granularity are we talking about? Again, the time series granularity, which assume that you can look at the future in equispaced buckets. That's per day, per week, per month. It's not necessarily. There are many businesses for which it's not sensical. And then we can even go into the problem that you're also ignoring uncertainty. Again, that's a problem with point forecast. You see, it's an enormous array So it's like a herd of elephants. I'm not too sure what is the proper term in English for many elephants.
Either a horde or a stampede. I'm going to
let's say
guess it's something like that.
Stampede of elephants.
I'm
or
going to
whatever.
guess.
You have
hold me to
so
that.
many elephants in this room that are just being ignored, and many companies want to focus on accuracy. I really challenge that. For me, it looks like you have an entire room where you don't know anything about this room. You have a microscope. You're looking at a tiny, square millimeter, and you say, okay, what I need is a bigger microscope. I really challenge the idea that what you need is a bigger, better microscope.
Okay, two key points here. One, it's a herd of elephants. And two, just to be precise, and two, okay, well, just to at least be charitable here, you, in your very first, your opening salvo, you talked about the quasi-totality of companies are spending inordinate amounts of, let's say, money and attention and resources, just allocating resources for very little upside.
Yes.
Okay, upside return, you mean?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Before we deconstruct that too much, what is the steelman position for that? Like, what do companies at least believe that is the upside to what they're doing?
I mean, they believe that when they approach the future through point time series forecast, and that they adopt a metric which is I would say a single dimensional metric like a mean absolute percentage error or mean absolute error, or one of the typical metrics. They assume that the minimization of this criteria is positively correlated with profits somehow. And I really challenge this position. And which means, this is their core belief. I really challenge this position. My take is that very frequently there is very little correlations or no correlations, and sometimes even inverse correlations, which mean that actually a forecast that can be made more inaccurate can actually make the company more profitable. That was, by the way, one of the first discovery that I made at Lokad 15 years ago. We were delivering superior forecast accuracy-wise, and very frequently it was actually creating chaos and hurting the businesses of those poor first clients. It's counterintuitive, but actually it does happen. And just an example to understand. One of the easiest way you can improve the accuracy of a forecasting process is to make the forecasting algorithm extremely reactive, meaning that when you have like small variations in recent data, the forecasting algorithm will respond very strongly. The problem is that means that you have a forecast that is swinging up and down massively all the time. So it's a more accurate forecast, but it's also a very unstable forecast. And the problem is that in a real world supply chain, you have ratchet effects over the place. Once you pass a purchase order to an overseas supplier, if the next day your demand forecast suddenly drop because it was just a flux, it was just a fluctuation upward of your demand forecast, you're stuck with a purchase order. So this is typically a sort of situation where increased accuracy do not translate, and on the contrary, increased accuracy decrease your profitability. You have also other things. That was the situation that actually led us to probabilistic forecast. A decade and a half ago. I mean, almost a decade and a half ago. It was the fact that when you have demand that is intermittent, if you forecast zero, it's usually a very accurate forecast. And so very frequently, if you have like intermittent demand, you can have a forecasting model that will just forecast zero demand. And from a statistical perspective, that's going to be a very good, very accurate forecast. But business-wise, if you forecast zero, you replenish zero, and you sell zero, and it's not, and obviously you don't make that many profits based on that. So that's the sort of shenanigans that you get when you chase accuracy. You have dozens of other problems, and again, the belief that you have a positive correlation between forecasting accuracy and profitability is misplaced. It's really misplaced.
So there's a point there, the term you said before that was, it might seem counterintuitive, and I think, having had this discussion with not only you but other people before, that understanding the goal of what it is you're trying to do can help with the degree of counterintuitivity you experience. So, for example, if you believe that greater forecast accuracy or higher forecast accuracy is the metric you're optimizing for, then you saying a less accurate forecast is not necessarily more profitable, that sounds counterintuitive. If you're talking about making better decisions, and that's the end goal that you're optimizing for, we're not the only ones who've pointed out that. I think it was actually, forgive me if I'm misremembering this, I think it was Stefan Kalasa wrote a couple of years ago in Foresight, essentially about the idea of decision insensitivity. So you might have a more accurate and a less accurate forecast, but they converge on the exact same decision because of, let's say, an MOQ. Thus, the extra forecast accuracy didn't buy you anything. The less accurate forecast was more profitable in terms of net income than the more accurate one.
And again, you have so many problems with the time series perspective. You end up chasing, essentially what you have is known, generally speaking, as the McNamara fallacy. You're really chasing, you have the wrong paradigm, you're chasing the wrong metrics. The audience can look it up. There is a Wikipedia page on this misguided generals who led the Vietnam War efforts. From the side of the US. But fundamentally, let's consider just an example. You are a fashion company, fashion brand, and your problem is that the collection that you're about to push to the market is entirely missing the one thing that would completely match the present trend. Let's imagine that this is the problem. So we have a collection that is about to arrive in the market, and it completely ignore the, say, textile style pattern, whatever that would be super trendy.
Bell bottoms in the 70s.
And your forecast, you know what? It's just very accurate. It predicts that your collection upcoming is going to perform miserably. Thank you. Okay, good. You have a very accurate forecast. Thank you very much. Thank you. It just, so you see, a forecast will only forecast, again, we are talking of the classic paradigm, so time series. It will only forecast the time series that you have. What about a product that you don't have, that you should have? How will this be accounted for in your accuracy metric? The answer is it isn't. So the main problem, and I'd say, is that it is really, as a paradigm, it is very, very weak, and it ignores so many things that for the quasi-totality of companies, it is a complete distraction because they have not done the sort of preliminary work to make it a relevant metric. You see, it's the sort of things where if we were talking of a company that would be extremely mature, that can assess demand, thinking of in terms of abstract demand that is completely, I would say, decoupled from the actual assortment that you have, that is already considering the many variety of uncertainties, demand, lead times, prices, returns, etc., etc., that is already embracing a probabilistic vision, that is already embracing a functional vision. Functional means that you have to take into account that the future depends on decisions that have not yet been made. So we are back to sequential decision processes, etc., etc. So if you're taking a company that has done all of that, then yes, maybe that's a point where you can start asking yourself about accuracy metrics, which are going to be, by the way, relatively strange because we are talking of most likely probabilistic forecast. But as you see, that's a lot of things that that needs to be put as proper foundations. And when I say hidden cost of forecast accuracy, is that it's complete distraction because those foundations are completely missing. And thus, companies are chasing metrics that are essentially extremely narrow-minded and do not reflect the long-term interest of their businesses.
To build on the retail example you gave, I remember this is a while ago you mentioned this example, but I think you were talking about assortment optimization, and you gave the example of, like, if you're again, you're a fashion retailer, how many bright yellow T-shirts or bright pink T-shirts do you want in your assortment? I mean, you're not going to. It really depends. Why do you have them? If you have them because you think you're going to sell them, that might not be the case because you're not going to sell very many. But not having them makes your assortment look ugly because then you'll just have white shirts and black or blue jeans, and the store will look quite drab. So trying to capture the value of that pink or that yellow T-shirt in a time series is, I think it's lossy is the term you've used. It's a lossy representation of value or something to that effect. I'm butchering it, I'm sure.
Yes, it is indeed. It is a very lossy representation of the information about your store. And yes, that you see, that's where I say, what is a granularity? The problem with those forecasts is that they adopt typically a perspective that is not very smart. I mean, if you want to think of a store, you would like to think of how should I actually optimize my inventory, my assortment decisions. So assortment decision, inventory decision, pricing decision to maximize the demand being served successfully from the store. That would be, a perspective. Another angle would be how do I maximize, the long-term value of every single individual client, which matters. For example, if we are back to fashion, if you give a discount to a client, that creates a bad habit.
Yeah.
The client then suddenly has an expectation to come back. When this client will come back, he or she will expect that there is a discount again. So again, that's plenty of things that we are looking at the future. It's here when we say, there will be this habit being created. We are looking at the future. We are actually implicitly making a forecast. And that's why I say when people start actually discussing forecasting accuracy, they are trying to articulate a judgment about the quality of their anticipation of the future. And what I'm saying is that the sort of qualities that you get in the quasi-totality of companies that are locked into this extremely narrow-minded paradigm, which is point time series forecast, is just this paradigm is so restrictive and so wrong that whatever numbers come up in terms of metrics from these paradigms, it is just a waste of time. It is a waste of time. And whatever improvement you think you're going to get is just an illusion. And I have seen, by the way, also anecdotal evidence, not proof, but anecdotal evidence. I have seen dozens and dozens over the years, data science teams who came up with a 20% more accurate, according to MAPI, mean absolute percentage error, or IMEA, mean absolute error, or whatever, a 20% more accurate forecast, which never goes to prediction because it creates so many problems. Lokad, again, 1.5 decades ago, was part of those, let's say, data science-led companies who were facing this sort of problems, and it seems that the problem is still ongoing. And recent developments like FVA, forecast value add, are just making this even worse.
Okay, well. Again, there's a private question has come through. Again, you can, if you don't want to comment publicly, you can send them privately. I'll ask them at the end. But I will come back to the idea of FEA and accuracy because, well, that's what I was just asked about. But to push on a little bit, because again, the topic is the hidden cost of forecast accuracy. Again, your book is on the table. Economics is a huge part of your overall Weltanschauung, the way you see the world. And again, you repeatedly stress the importance of both direct and indirect costs, and opportunity costs being the indirect. So in pretty concrete terms, what are the costs in practice of an enterprise focusing on chasing accuracy? Like, how does that show up in day-to-day expenses or losses?
That show up in your inventory managers or production managers or whoever is making the actual decisions, spending a lot of time to twist the numbers so that they can finally end up with a semi-sensical decision. Companies sometimes wonder, but it's very strange. We have the forecast that is supposed to be accurate, and then we have simple rules to derivate the decisions. What do we buy? What do we produce? Where do we allocate the stock? What are the prices? It turned out that it takes an immense amount of I would say, manpower to convert those forecasts into actual decisions. Why is that? Well, the answer, it's because the forecasts are so much nonsense that you need a lot of manpower, of thinking power, to do all the things that the forecast is not doing properly. And thus, this person, or more likely, those entire teams, are in fact doing all the work of properly thinking the future so that the decisions actually make sense. And you see, that is one of the hidden costs, is that why is your supply chain not entirely automated in terms of decision-making processes end to end? And the very short answer is that because your forecasts are extremely dysfunctional, and that is a much more severe problem than your forecasts being inaccurate. You see, they are dysfunctional in the sense they are not even expressed in a way that lend itself to this decision-making process. It's not the right granularity. It doesn't focus on the right things. It do not have the nuance that is needed, etc., etc., etc. So you have an illusion of a quantified future, but that's just an illusion. And I said here, when we are talking of this forecasting accuracy, again, from the classic perspective, you're just chasing this illusion of quantifying the future.
Well, and I'm going to preface this by saying we're not going to go into an aside diatribe on FEA, but just as an example of like concrete cost, often, again, we know companies, for examples, will spend a sizable amount of money directly and indirectly on software products to institute FEA. Again, we're not having a comment on whether or not FEA works. It's irrelevant. It's listing it as a cost, an additional a surcharge in pursuit of a metric. Like, we want to see what's adding, what's decrementing or incrementing accuracy.
Yes.
So, I mean, there are, like, it's not just, and this is what I'm trying to stress, or at least to understand if I've confirm if I've understood, it's not just the attention, there's the salaries, correct. There's the attention, there's the opportunity cost, and in many cases, and we know examples, there is also software intervention. You're paying vendors for this, etc. So there's a lot.
Yes, and also, for example, if you add people in the loop, as it is done in s&op, and part of the idea of s&op is to somehow increase synchronization, increase accuracy. The way you want people to produce what the sales team is about to sell and what the marketing is about to promote. You see, so you want to have this company-wide synchronization, and in a way, it is about chasing accuracy, so that you have less bias, less desynchronization between all those parties. But this comes as a massive cost, which is this manual synchronization is extremely slow. For most companies, it's only once per quarter. And some companies are doing it once in a month, but it's already very slow. That means that even if you're in the, like let's say, the best among the very best companies practicing s&op, that's going to be a monthly cycle. This is, in my books, this is extremely, extremely slow. So that's another cost associated with chasing this accuracy, is that suddenly everything that you do lags of 30 days or more. This is not good.
I agree, and I just jotted down an addendum to that. Again, when we're talking about the focus, so again, you were talking about the focus on KPIs, and often it is forecast accuracy, but you actually mentioned at the start, or towards the start, the idea that essentially makes you effectively blind to many other sources of uncertainty, because it's for the most part, the quasi-totality, demand. We're forecasting demand.
And demand in a very specific way, which is through the lenses of the stuff for which you have time series. You see, again, this is not just all the demand. It's the stuff where, so effectively what you're doing is almost exclusively is projecting sales. Sales according to your historical sales. As you see, so we are very far from demand. For example, how do you even think of accuracy when you had in the past, let's say, major stockouts, and so you have not observed the demand? There was like a censorship. because
yeah.
you only sold so much because you didn't have more. Very frequently,
That's a really good example, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very frequent
Yeah.
example. So what would the quasi-totality of vendors say, and consultants, and that's even something you will find in many textbooks. It would say, oh, just ignore the portion of history where you had those problems.
Yeah.
My answer is hell no. It is this is if you run into a stock out. Let's say, for example, you do a promotion and it in a hypermarket, and you run into a stock out after 2 hours opening. On Monday morning you open, bam, 2 hours afterwards you are out of stock. It is an information that is very significant. If the promotion supposed to last 10 days run out of stock by the end of the 9th day, that's a completely different situation. So you see, the fact that you run out of stock out, that you end up into a stock out, it doesn't invalidate completely. You can still use this information, even if indeed it comes with complications. So the point that I'm saying here is that, again, the problem that I have with accuracy is that it is practiced with a defective paradigms. Again, almost everywhere, and thus, when you chase this accuracy, as it is practiced by 99% plus of the companies, I'm saying that it comes with immense cost and very little upside, if any.
Well, again, to take your own example, and just to sort of like peel the onion in terms of hidden costs, you gave the example of a stock out event, and again, the traditional perspective there would be, well, if you don't have, you're in a store, you don't have eggs. Okay, well, I've lost the sale of eggs. Well, what about the fact that most things will be bought in combination? So you forecasted a certain level of demand for eggs. You had a stock out on eggs. Well, I lost the value of those eggs. Well, what about the bread, the cheese, the milk, the ham, the fabric softener, the washing liquid? All of those things would likely have been in the basket, but eggs being a certain product, I know for me, I'll eat a lot of eggs, look at me. And if there aren't eggs in a store, I go to a store that has eggs. And I take with me all the money I would have spent on all those other products.
Yeah, that's the typical case for probabilistic forecasting, is that most of the economic value in supply chain lies at the extremes.
Yes.
It's a surprisingly high demand that creates the stock out, surprisingly low demand that creates the overstock, and potentially in case of perishable goods will create the inventory write-off. And again, for the quasi-totality of companies focusing on classic accuracy, this will be invisible because you're focusing on the average, the median. Yeah. And by the way, this is also true for these problems appears not just for food. It will be for aviation, where you have AOGs, aircraft on ground. You're missing a screw that is worth $20, and bam, your A320 is grounded for a day because you're missing just a tiny part. So that yes, that is also something where the idea that your accuracy, which for point forecast, is going to reflect that or correlate to the economics. I think it's this proposition is just very incorrect in most situations. But I think for this audience, what they have to remember is that very frequently it is literally negatively correlated. So it's you by improving your accuracy, you are making the situation worse. Remember, that's a very real possibility that happens very frequently. It's important because otherwise, I would say that the counter argument will be very frequently, oh, but we are improving accuracy because at least it doesn't hurt. And my answer is, oh yes, it can hurt. It does. Very frequently it does. And that's one of the key reasons why so few of those data science projects ever go to production, is that those more accurate forecasts are creating so many problems that they are being vetoed. And it creates immense frustration for the data science teams because they say, but look, our forecast was 20% more accurate. Those practitioners, they're so backward. They say tradition, and they resist the change. The reality is, no, it's not that. It's just people look at those numbers. intuitively grasp that those numbers are going to create immense problem for the companies. And so, but they don't have necessarily the complete end-to-end quantitative analysis to explain why. So in the end, they just say it does. I would say the typical inventory planner is just going to look at those forecasts, which are supposedly more accurate, but create many not so quite visible problems. They would just say, no, I don't like it. I just want to keep my 3 years flat average and stick with it. And so, I don't take your forecast. So for the data science team, that seems insanity. Why this 3 years flat average? It looks like dumb. But what they don't see is that the sophisticated model with this, I would say, time series perspective, which is completely broken, is creating a lot of problem. And for the inventory manager, this very naive, like 3 years average forecast, it is it is at least an instrument that has some of the properties that is interesting: high stability, easy to understand, etc., etc. And because there is so much extra work to be done to capture the future correctly, at least this input doesn't interfere with all the rest of the work that the inventory manager, production manager, allocation manager, store manager, etc., needs to do to actually take the real world decisions.
The thing is, when you talk, again, you literally just said capturing the future, and the substance of the conversation has mostly been the expense, direct and indirect, associated with forecasting demand, particularly through time series. But you mentioned earlier about the importance of like lead times, returns, etc. Why do you think, this is just speculating for anyone listening, but why do you think the companies, the quasi-totality, not all, the quasi-totality of companies are so gung-ho, so very, very interested in forecasting demand and getting super, super accurate about that, but this other enormous, very, very common, very well-known and documented source of uncertainty, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. That doesn't exist.
I mean, that's where I have to pitch in the book.
Okay.
Chapter 7, the future. So what the quasi-totality of the companies out there are practicing is, in technical terms, the teleological vision, which in short assume that you can, just like the Gosplan entity for the USSR, they assume that you can have, the demand projected 1 year ahead, or in the Gosplan that was 5 years ahead. You can project the demand and then freeze it. Mm-hmm. And then the whole games become a resource allocation problem. So you see, it becomes only about orchestrating the resource for that, and you assume that everything will be done reliably. If not, this is a problem that you need to fix. And so, for example, lead time, the classic theory would say, but no, don't forecast the lead time. Just get suppliers that are reliable and that will deliver the stuff on time. Does this view actually survive in the real world? It doesn't, but it is nevertheless, it is a sort of perspective that are adopted in the quasi-totality of books. You have even more nonsensical visions. Sometimes authors will admit, lead times can vary. Let's adopt a normal distribution, which goes into positive probabilities for negative lead times, which is super strange when you think about it. It means that, for example, you will find in textbooks, not mine, but you will find in textbooks authors who say, let's have a normal distribution for the lead times. So that means that it's completely okay to have like -1 day of lead time for a product. So you order now and you receive the product yesterday. It doesn't make any sense, but nevertheless, it's the sort of things that you will find in many pieces of software and the literature.
All right. Well, Joannes, I thank you. I should point out that my computer has been going haywire in the background, and I thought there were no questions, and then it just rebooted while you were talking, and there actually are many. So I had absolutely I had no idea, and then all of a sudden I saw that there are questions, quite a few. So hold on, I do need to just give me one moment to process.
Microsoft they did the Windows update at the right moment.
Unbelievable.
It's just the right moment.
Yeah, but exactly. The computer works perfectly fine, and then when we do a live event. All right, so we'll come back to a closing comment later. I will push straight to a comment. So this is a comment from Timur. When forecasting KPIs are not correlated with profits, that means that these particular forecasting KPIs have to be changed. We have a good experience with redefining KPIs to these where we see a correlation. So what do you think, Joannes? When forecasting KPIs are not correlated with profits, that means that these particular forecasting KPIs have to be changed?
Yes, but then we should really challenge is that if you apply all the necessary changes so that your KPI becomes correlated with profit, can you still call it forecasting accuracy?
Mm.
Is it what is being called forecasting accuracy in the literature? Is it what is called forecasting accuracy within advanced planning system or enterprise planning solutions?
Mm.
And my answer is no. So yes. So if we say then it's possible to introduce a KPI that is actually correlated to profit, I say absolutely.
Mm.
But it doesn't go by the name of forecasting accuracy anymore, and nobody looking at this calculation would say, "Oh, it's a variant of accuracy." So you see that's the problem is that yes, it's possible to correlate profit to correlate the quality of your anticipation of the future to your profit. It is, but when you do that, you end up with stuff that is so different that no statistician would call it anymore a forecasting accuracy. At least we have departed. We are so far gone that it's something very different.
Mm-hmm. All right. Next question from Vivek. My question is: should we measure accuracy or error in My computer has just gone haywire. Sorry, that was not dramatic. My question is, should we measure accuracy or error in volume or error?
Accuracy in volume of error?
You can just read it here. So again, this is why having a... My question is, should we measure accuracy or error in volume? Or error in volume. Yes, error in volume of error. Yeah.
Again, the problem is not to have an absolute metric expressed in units or having something expressed as a percentage. This is a completely irrelevant technicality. Mm-hmm. Same thing, for example, if you want to pick the square root error or whatever, all of that are mathematical instruments that have a mathematical definition. They have no, the point that I'm making is that those things have no correlations whatsoever to the profits of the company. So if you have a proper KPI, it will be something that, again, a litmus test would be if a statistician or mathematician would recognize your performance indicator, its formula, as something that would be named accuracy, it's not an economic criteria, because I can guarantee you that when you factor the economics, it gets very dirty. It becomes like extremely specific of the business. So it's something that you cannot transpose to another business. It becomes something that is extremely attached to the the strategic ambitions of this very business, and it comes with many edge cases, and so there is a lot of complexity associated to specificity of the business. Again, those performance indicators are, again, the ones that are economically driven are very useful, but if you want to recognize them, they are typically quite verbose because they need to take into account plenty of factors of the business. They don't have, those indicators don't have the sort of mathematical elegance of, I would say, the purely mathematical criteria like a mean absolute error, MAPI, weighted MAPI, and whatnot. This is not something that you can write in one line of code. It will typically take hundreds, if not a few thousands lines of code, because you have to factor in tons of stuff.
All right, thank you. I'm going to return to a question that was sent. Genuinely, I actually, the computer's telling me I have to restart my computer, but this was sent earlier. So this was in response to your comments about negative, like a negative forecast can in fact be more profitable. And I'm reading this verbatim. Okay, yeah, a 10% more accurate forecast might not make more money, but a 20% less accurate one will surely lose your money. Thus, asks Joannes,
that is not the case.
Does,
that is literally
wait
not
for the
case.
question.
Yes.
Thus, asks Joannes, is accuracy at least directionally correlated with profitability?
No, it is not. That's what I said initially. It is not. And that was the mistake I did, by the way. The first few years of Lokad, that is the business model of Lokad was we deliver more accurate forecast. And we did. And we were still quite good on forecasting accuracy. A few years ago, for the M5 forecasting competition on Walmart data, Lokad landed #1 worldwide, while basically none of our competitors even managed to be in the top 100. So there was 1,000 companies competing worldwide. None of our competitors who are basically centering their discourse on more AI accurate forecasts or this sort of nonsense, even landed in the top 100. Lokad ended up in #1 at the SKU level in this competition and #5 overall. So can you make can a 20% less accurate forecast make your company more profitable? Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. This was the hard and painful lesson of the first few years that I had at Lokad. Again, I repeat, how do you get a 20% more accurate forecast? The answer is by making almost invariably the forecast more unstable. So you have an algorithm that will be very responsive to the latest drop of data. That is one of the easiest ways you can actually make your forecast more accurate. But when you put this sort of unstable forecasts, which are more accurate, into a real-world supply chain, it degrades the performance of the supply chain. So going back to something that is 20% less accurate actually improve the situation. Again, one of the easiest way to make a forecast more accurate when you have intermittent demand is to have the forecasting zeros most of the time. That is a very easy way. By the way, we won. We even won historically. We had a major RFP for a large European distributor, and I even won the forecasting competition for this distributor by returning only zeros. We were forecasting demand for mini markets. And so per product, per day, per mini market for like 5 days ahead. And the criteria was absolute value of forecast minus reality. And I used my zero forecaster model, which is just return zero everywhere. And this thing did actually 20% better than the company #2 in this forecasting competition for this tender. So you see, yes, you can absolutely make the business of the company, you can actually improve the business by making the forecast less accurate. Again, the problem is that time series are completely inadequate. And thus, when time series are used, crazy things happen all the time. And that's why you need so many people tweaking all the numbers and nudging and working with the spreadsheets on top of the forecast, because you cannot translate directly those time series forecasts into decisions. That's why, one of the core reasons why since the late 70s, supply chain automation didn't happen. It's because you cannot automate decision-making processes based on time series analysis. That is the problem.
Oh, all right. Well, next question. This is from Dimitri. And thank you for helping me with the admin, Dimitri, and reposting it. So comment, then question. Forecast accuracy is widely used because it's easy. How do you, Joannes, describe your concepts to other business stakeholders, not necessarily, cool nerds who get it immediately?
So the way we approach, we say, forget about the forecast. This is a numerical artifact. This is a value that is only transient. It is a mean to an end. What is the end? The end is the decisions. Yes. What do you buy? What do you produce? Where do you put the inventory? At which price point? Which price point do you put for the display? Those are the actual tangible decisions. And what we say is, forget those forecasts and the accuracy. Let's have a look at the decisions. And for every decisions, let's quantify in euros or dollars the half a dozen of forces that are at play. And let's have a debate on whether what we see through those forces feels right. That is the question. So we put one unit in this store. What is the extra margin that we think we'll get by putting this one extra unit in this store today? Do we have like a ballpark assessment? What is the stockade penalties that we avoid? What is the improvement in terms of quality of service? What is the risk of overstock that we are creating? What is the opportunity cost of actually taking space in the store that could be used for a better product? So there is opportunity cost, etc., etc. So we need to have an agreement on those KPIs, on those economic factors, and depending on the vertical, there will be plenty. There will be, those, I would say, the half a dozen or dozen of economic forces at play will vary substantially from one company to another, because the business model, their strategic intent is just very different. But nevertheless, the method that at Lokad we have is express that into economic drivers which reflect the future. So you see, the future is embedded into those economic valuation, monetary terms. And then we discuss on whether we think that we are correct, we are in the right area with the practitioners. And very frequently, we get much higher quality feedback when we take it from a purely financial angle. Because people will tell you, oh, you forgot, for example, you're telling me about pushing this unit today, but today the store is understaffed. So they don't have the resource to actually put the stuff on the shelf. So if you still push something, then that means that will be someone who normally is at the point of sale will need to do things, and the clients will be badly served. Thus, there should be a penalty for that. And then, we have the penalty because lack of staff. Okay, we include that as an extra factor. And again, that's so many things that end up into this anticipation of the future. And this is about getting it right for the future. You see, that's how I say quality of anticipation as opposed to forecasting accuracy. Forecasting accuracy being the time series point forecast paradigm.
Okay. Well, Dimitri was listening to you, so there's a follow-up here. Can you, Conor, can you ask how to apply all these economic factors to a 5,000 SKU portfolio? You've dealt with larger than that.
Yes,
so
we
applied
that to like 50 million plus a symbol of SKUs. The thing, what is very important is that you're writing the numerical recipe. So everything is all of that. That's why I say you're crafting a numerical recipe, and the way you proceed through that with practitioners is sampling. You look at you let yourself be driven by the anecdotal evidence. So forget about having an average accuracy, average performance, etc. This is not what should be driving. By the way, the method is also detailed in this book. This is called experimental optimization. So you take an example, and the planner will just, say next. They will look at the SKUs and will say, no, this one I disagree. So they will, the plan, if you start this method with actual people, they will have a look at your recipe, not the code, I mean the outputs, the economic factors, and then they will very quickly have objection. They would say, oh, I very much disagree on this thing. For example, this product, you tell me the stock out is this much. But guess what? This is a diaper. And diapers for young parents, it's so critical. They will, if parents do not find the diapers that they want of the correct brand in the hypermarket, they will immediately go to another hypermarket because this product is mission critical to young parents. Okay, fine. Okay, so the penalty here, you are like vastly underestimating that. So they will give you feedback, and they will be, and it's anecdotal. So then it's the work of the supply chain scientist to understand, okay, what is the general rule here? How do I get to the bottom of that? And our experience at Lokad, that's experimental optimization, in practice, is that you do a first pass, the planners, they object to like 90% of your lines. So they no matter which SKU or decisions you pick, they have tons of objection. And then you iterate and iterate. And very frequently for us, it takes us actually a few hundreds iteration, which are going to be done in 2 months. So sometimes it's like 5 iterations a day. You know, it's this sort of things where you tweak, repeat, tweak, repeat, tweak, repeat. Just like think of it as an Excel spreadsheet where you would be, you know, tweaking things. It's a process that is very agile. Sometimes our clients, they even have discussion live with the supply chain scientist over the phone, and the supply chain scientist is fixing the code, rerunning during the call to see what you get. And so you will iterate. And at some point, the practitioners say, I don't have any objection anymore. You know, I'm running out of objection. I can look at those decisions, and they kind of look all good and consistent, and there is no more anything insane. You know, this is our target, by the way, for production, is to have this 0% insanity. That is, so we're not looking at 0% inaccuracy. We're looking at 0% insanity. That is completely different perspective. And that is something that and that's something that you do through sampling. And again, it's pointless to say that you want to have like an average performance, average this, average that, because when you do those averages over many SKUs, you do not see the problems. You do not see the anecdotes, the special case that would need to be handled and that you're missing. It's kind of get buried into, even if you look, for example, for profitability, you have many SKUs that are going to be super highly profitable. So if you just average out the performance of many SKUs, you can have a SKU where you do something that is thoroughly insane, but it gets buried into many other SKUs for which you're very profitable and sane. So that's why you need to have this, again, experimental optimization, this perspective of being anecdote driven in order to fix the code and iterate very rapidly.
All right. 2 more, and just have to scroll back up. A lot of comments. Dimitri, I hope that helped. Okay, so take a sip of water. It's amazing how little water you drink during these. So, Joannes, from your perspective, this is from, forgive me, I presume I'm pronouncing this correctly, Elif or Elif? From your perspective, what approaches can help organizations to uncover and address hidden costs within cycles while ensuring a balance between agility and cost efficiency? Parentheses, cycles means S and OE or S&op.
So, ditch S&op.
How long do we have?
S&OE. That those things are just distraction. You know, again, that is like this is those processes have only one upside. It makes consultant rich. Just drop it. Really focus on the decision. Identify what are the decisions being made. And by the way, in the book, I define decision is something, a supply chain decision is something very simple. It is an allocation of resource that support the flow of physical goods. That's it. It's an allocation of resource. So you convert $1 into raw materials for your supply chain. This is an allocation of resource. You take this one unit of raw materials and you convert that into a production for semi-finished products. This is an allocation of resource. You move 1 unit of inventory from one place to another. This is an allocation of resource, etc., etc. So just focus on the allocation of resources, and those are the decisions that are being made, and just take everything from there. Just do not accept that. Do not let artifacts, that is numerical artifacts, which are intermediate steps, define your process. Those numerical artifacts, forecast would be part of that, are completely transient. You know, they're disposable. You can get rid of them. You can replace them by something better. Those things are not fundamental. They are entirely disposable. Unlike the decisions are fundamental. You could revisit your business 50 years from now. I can guarantee you will still have the problem of $1 being converted in stuff that you buy, stuff that you've bought being transformed through a production process. You know, those decisions are extremely stable, unlike the numerical artifacts, which are completely transient.
All right. Well, this is actually a long comment that, I mean, I'll probably no. It's a long comment. There's a lot of context, so I am deliberately narrowing this down to just a question. We'll send a longer answer later, but broadly, do you think, Joannes, that KPIs should differ for different supply chain categories, thus mirroring the difference in purchasing and production constraints and lead times?
I would say typically no. I mean, what you want is you want to have KPIs that reflect the economics of your companies. This can include many factors that are category dependent. So again, let's be clear. There are companies out there. Some of them are very large, who have incredibly diverse businesses. So if you have a company that is on one hand doing toys and on the other hand doing aviation parts, I mean, that's two separate businesses. Probably the KPIs for one or the other are just going to be completely different. Okay. But let's say we have something that is relatively homogeneous. Let's say, you're looking at, let's say, avionics, and there are many kinds of avionics. Should you have KPIs that are defined differently depending on the type of avionics? I would say probably not. What you probably have is the code. So the logic of your KPI is the same across the board, but it has category-specific parameters, or that's typically the way Lokad approach that. Sometimes we even have tons of things that are like product-specific parameters or SKU-specific parameters. It's just fine. But my suggestion is that try to keep the numerical recipe as unified as possible. Why? Because remember that ultimately everything that you do compete for the exact same resources. So, for example, all your categories of stuff that you purchase are ultimately competing for the same dollars that are in the bank account of the company. So you see, it all converges to the same pool of resource. Everything that you have to keep in store, all the categories end up competing for the same storage space in the same warehouse. So you see, you have all those, I would say, company-wide constraints, and that's why if you have things that are not, I would say, homogeneous, it's going to be extremely difficult to do the proper arbitrage between all those allocations. And that is also a problem with, again, but that's a separate discussion, with the classic view on supply chain optimization, is that they tend, the classic view tend to process in silos, category by category, extra. And that is completely missing the point. You want to have, if you want to do supply chain optimization, it should be optimizing your supply chain end to end, seeing where can I make an allocation of resource that has the highest rate of return in terms of economic performance.
I should also say that there was an enormous amount of context to Timur's question. So if he was listening, he might be pulling his hair out. Like, Conor has just stripped my question down. As I said, we'll send a more detailed response later. Joannes has not seen the full context of that. So that was an off-the-cuff comment. So we've been going for an hour. I think we've answered all the questions and comments. But there's still one, which is, a lot of people seem buzzed about this topic, which is great. And also a lot of people will have, they operate in frameworks where they want to affect change, but they still have to respect their own constraints. And, we deal in numerical recipes, we deal in constraints. So they have S&op meetings. They do have forecast value software that they have to, at least for now, operate with or around or through or whatever. What is your advice to people who want to start making the changes that you're talking about, but they are kind of operating in that sort of a system?
Change of company. Literally.
Well, there you go, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
I'm serious. You see, the problem is that when you say, okay, this framework, this organization is completely dysfunctional, there is something that is obvious that should be happening, it's not happening, you should be changing of company, because this will blow up. This means that at some point, one of your competitor is going to figure it out. They will figure out how to enact the change. And then for the company who do not enact the change, it will mean troubles. You see, just think of all those retailers who went bust facing Amazon. You know, they literally could not comprehend what was happening. And by the way, when I started Lokad, I've been in discussion in Europe with many retail companies. Many of them have gone bankrupt since then. And they were telling me, because I was talking about presenting Amazon as an, they were saying, "Oh, Mr. Vermorel, Amazon, this is just such a niche. You know, this is this tiny thing on the internet. It's not very serious. Nobody will ever buy and insert here a TV, a sofa, a dress, a car, blah, blah, blah on the internet. Yeah, nobody will ever buy that. Yes, maybe a book.
People love going outside.
But yeah, exactly. They will never buy this or that or that. Or imagine, you know, buying an expensive camera online. No, obviously no, etc. So everybody was making excuses, and it just completely blew up. And again, if you are in an organization that is where you have a lot of busy work, just imagine your competitor just decide to make a bold move, and then they robotize that, and all of that is gone. How long do you think your company will survive if they don't do it? And if they do you think your position will still be there? And you see, and my take, and the reason why I say change company is that I see many people who are stuck. You know, I think that's one of the privilege of modernity, is that you're not stuck in one place. You know, especially for people who have quantitative skills, analytical skills. Those things are very much in demand. So you have like tons of companies who are fighting. Lokad, by the way, we're struggling so much to hire people. It's very difficult. So those skills are very much in demand. Why would you waste, you know, years of your life in a company that is just completely misusing you through a broken process? This is nuts. And so my suggestion, and that's a suggestion that I've made because I had many students, if you ever get yourself trapped in a position where the company, you know, is having, you are a cog in a mechanism that is already completely obsolete, but the problem is that you as a cog do not have the power to just upgrade the machine so that you would become again a cog, but in a very functional state-of-the-art machine, then again, your employer is you can have loyalty for your employer. It's good, but it's not like a contract for life. You're not a fonctionnaire, as we would say in French. You know, you're not stuck with this company for life. My suggestion is very politely, in a constructive way, try to push ideas to enact the change. Very frequently, people are surprised. You know, it's the reason change do not happen is that nobody is even trying to push for it. People assume that by default, the change would be rejected outright. My limited experience in working for, again, I've worked mostly for my own company, but I've been working a little bit in other companies previously. Is that if you have a lot of leeway to go to the higher up, and if you have a case that is making sense, that is well put together, and that provides some stuff that looks, you know, reasonable and feasible, change can happen. And so that would be my suggestion. But again, if you're stuck in an obsolete process, it is urgent for you to just move to another company that will make a better use of you. Because otherwise, just imagine 10 years from now, you're still in the same sort of obsolete position, but it was obsolete 10 years ago. And now on your resume, you have 10 years of busy work doing something that was obsolete. And that selling yourself to your next employer is going to be very tough. So that's my suggestion, is that don't linger in a company that is just misusing you, or that is just keeping you part of an obsolete process. This is not good for you, and in fact, it's not even good for the company.
To be fair, that's not even that's not even theoretical. There are people who are friends of the channel who have recently moved to other positions for that exact reason, and they've disclosed it privately.
And good for them. Good for them. It's and again, I think it is also a way to create the change that you want to see in the market. You see, it's just you see something very obsolete. You say, I'm not going to contribute to that, which is very obsolete. I'm just going to go to this other company who is doing something much smarter, And in terms of employment prospect, well, guess what? If you go to a company that is doing smarter things, let's say Amazon, which happen to be very profitable, again, Amazon, the odds that you will get a much higher salary after a while are very, very high.
Well, as a closing thought, I will share with you, Timur agrees with you. I agree with Joannes' advice to change company. Do not waste your time if you're not allowed to implement what is making sense to you.
I mean, yeah, but if you want to have the change, you need to make a serious effort in packaging your proposition. That means, really pyramid style. So you need to have a primer that is no longer than half a page for the boss of your boss, so that you have something that is very digestible. Then you have like the longer version that is going to be maybe 2 pages and then maybe 10 pages, and concrete example. If you can have numbers expressed in P&L, profit and loss, that is going to speak to the upper management. Don't be the data scientist that says, we need to go to deep learning, and I think we should really adopt LoRa, low rank decomposition. I think that's the future. We need to do that. The management is going to say, what are you even talking about? So it needs to be very grounded. Again, I have never met, I don't think I've ever met an executive in any company where, when presented a business plan expressed in dollars or euro, would say, I don't even want to listen to that. I've seen many situations where people say, your business plan is very interesting, but completely flawed because you made the wrong assumption, so what you compute is incorrect. But I've rarely seen top management being like unwilling to engage on something because it was like financially motivated. This I've never seen.
All right. Well, Joannes, we have been talking and standing for 70 minutes. We're out of questions. I did legs earlier today, so I am actually quite tired. So we're out of questions. We're out of time. Thank you, as always, for all of your insights. And to everyone who's attended and asked questions, both privately and publicly, much appreciated. If you want to continue the conversation, feel free to connect with us privately, no problem. Or if you're watching this video on replay, and it is available on replay, drop a comment down below, and one of us will respond to you. And on that note, we'll see you next week, and get back to work.